Cross-functional collaboration is absolutely valuable to get alignment and get everyone on the same page. And it's equally so difficult. Everyone's got their own priorities and their own
Right.
initiatives. How do you get this done with conflicting priorities and perspectives?
I think there are a lot of ways to do this. $100 voting. And it's a fun one where you say, hey, everyone gets $100 and you're going to invest it across these different projects. And what does that look like? And all of a sudden, that mindset of, okay, I'm actually thinking as the company leader, what would I objectively try to do is very different from, oh, I just want my idea to win, right? And so I think a lot of it is just about, making sure that people can think about kind of like the bigger picture and agree on a higher level goal. And if you're not aligned around that bigger goal and rallied around it, then you really have no hope of actually trying to convince anyone.
Yuki, it's a pleasure to have you on the CPO Mastery podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, to kick it off, I'd love to learn about your journey from your early career in products to now the CPO at Figma.
Yeah, for sure. So, out of college, I worked at Microsoft working on a product called Hotmail, for those of you who remember. And as a product manager working on the onboarding as we were going from Hotmail to Outlook.com. And after that, I ended up in Silicon Valley at YouTube, and then later at Uber. And Uber was where I would say, kind of the journey to how I got to Figma started because, back in 2017, we were looking for a new tool to really help product and design teams feel less siloed. And as part of that, some of the designers found Figma. And so we ended up being one of Figma's early customers. And so, as a product manager at the time, I fell in love with the tool because, before I was taking a PNG from a designer, taking it into Photoshop, making some edits just so that it looked right for my deck. And now I could go in and see the source of truth, even contribute to the design. So it was a huge game changer. And, that's kind of what convinced me that Figma was a place to be. And it really aligned also philosophically with how I thought about roles, which is that, roles between or the boundaries between design and product are things is something that should be blurred. And, I think Figma embraced that.
I didn't realize that Uber was an early customer, and that's the story. So that's
Yeah.
interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Speaking about skills and traits for product managers, you've mentioned about the importance of storytelling, yeah, for product managers. Could you share your philosophy behind why you think that's important? And also one or two tactics that product managers can start to do to help improve their storytelling skills.
For sure. I mean, I think there are reasons that are both internal and external. In terms of external, you're thinking about what story am I telling my customers? And oftentimes, when you're talking to your customers, and this is true both for consumer as well as in B2B, you're not just telling them about the features, right? You're kind of trying to ladder it up to, okay, what is this product trying to be? Like, what is the story that it's trying to tell me? And, I think especially in Figma, I've kind of learned that customers aren't just looking for a feature list. They're actually looking for a story that they can believe in. Like they can understand the trajectory of where this company or product is going. So I think being able to tell that is really powerful. And so that's on the external side. The internal side is, you as a product manager, we often talk about kind of like, influencing without authority, right?
Yeah.
And that's a really big part of being a product manager. And a huge part of that is rallying people behind something, right? A really big problem that's really exciting
Yeah.
or, a solution that's really interesting. And so the storytelling around that is super important. And when I think about kind of like ways in which product managers can be better storytellers, I really just think about kind of like, um, you know, this idea that a story is something that should be memorable, right? So, for example, if you're in a product review and you're sharing an insights to the CEO or other leaders, I often encourage them to memify that insight and kind of say, hey, like, what does it feel like if for that person to remember, right, from that meeting, this insight that they'll then keep using over and over again because it was that compelling, right? And so these are the kinds of things that you kind of have to think about, right? So that people remember what you're trying to say. Or, if you're solving a particular problem, you want people to remember your framework, right? Remember how to think about the problem. Otherwise, it's just one of many meetings that, kind of get washed away in the sea of, all the information that you're exposed to.
That's a great tactical tip. So if there's an insight that you want people to remember, memify it so it
Right.
just sticks in their mind.
Right. Right.
That's awesome. Speaking about, you mentioned external storytelling. Is there something that you could do there? You said customers don't want a list of features;
Right.
they want a story. Is there any as a tactic that you could share? Is it grouping things together, or how would you do that?
I mean, certainly, on the marketing side, that's what ends up happening, right? Like instead of fragmented launches, like how do you bundle it into something that's cohesive, right? And oftentimes, you could launch 50 features, but not get credit for all of it if it doesn't ladder up to something that you can remember, right? Or what do they take back when they have to explain to, in the case of maybe you're a SaaS tool and you need, the user to make a case internally, right? Like how do you equip them with the story? Right. So those are kind of things that I think about. I think in terms of techniques, it's really like how do you distill everything down into a few sentences of one visual? And I think this is both for external and internal. But I often think about designing like the money slide, right? Like that one slide, that one visual that people are going to take back, right? Whether to their teams, to their stakeholders, and how can you optimize around that?
Oh, I would love to get into some of this when we talk about what happened here today. So
For
looking forward
sure.
to that. Are there any other skills that you think are important for PMs to really develop and hone?
Yeah. I think some of the best PMs have this mastery of different zoom levels or different altitudes. And so, a lot of what problem solving is about is being able to keep stepping back and, saying, okay, well, why are we talking about this feature? Why are we talking about the problem that motivated that feature in the first place? And, you start to kind of understand, okay, well, maybe where are we not aligned, right?
Mm,
Because oftentimes you might present an idea and you find that maybe your stakeholders are not as interested as you expect or not as aligned. And then, what you end up doing is sometimes you get into those details and wonder, like, how come I can't convince this person? And you realize, like, it's not the fact that, it's not the execution that they actually care about. It's actually the underlying problem that they disagree with, right? And so being able to kind of like zoom out like that is really important. Or in some cases, zoom in. Sometimes you're operating too much at a high level and you're not able to get to the details that really make the difference or make the experience feel the way it should. And so just being conscious about kind of I talk about it as zoom levels just because it's almost like, you're hitting control minus or control plus. Like you want to
yeah.
be intentional about like which altitude you're operating at and being able to kind of like go in and out.
So that's really interesting and cool because if you're presenting to stakeholders and you feel that they're not understanding, try to change your zoom level.
Right.
Could be zooming in or
Right.
zooming out and seeing if that helps. Thanks for
Right.
that very tactical
Yeah.
tip. Cross-functional collaboration is absolutely valuable to get alignment and get everyone on the same page. And it's equally so difficult. Everyone's got their own priorities and their own
Right.
initiatives. So how do you get this done with conflicting priorities and perspectives?
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna actually talk a little bit about it tomorrow too, in terms of like how do you actually, we my mentor Shashir and I, he's the CEO of Coda, we talk a lot about kind of effective meetings or effective ways of planning. And a big thing about kind of something like planning is people have their different incentives, right? And people think that, okay, like they want their idea to win or they really care about advancing their goal. So what are ways in which you can kind of like reset from that and get everyone to think about the bigger picture or wear the company hat. And so I think there are a lot of ways to do this. One ritual we talk about is, for example, $100 voting. And it's a fun one where you say, hey, everyone gets $100. You're going to invest it across these different projects. And what does that look like? And all of a sudden, that mindset of, okay, I'm actually thinking as the company leader, what would I objectively try to do is very different from, oh, I just want my idea to win. Right. And so I think a lot of it is just about, making sure that people can think about kind of like the bigger picture and agree on a higher level goal. And if you're not aligned around that bigger goal and rallied around it, then you really have no hope of actually trying to convince anyone.
Mm,
And I think the other thing is like I talk a lot about is how to make it so that people feel like it's almost their idea or something that they're invested in. And over the course, especially as a more junior PM, like the way to convince an engineer, it's that something shouldn't take 2 weeks is to make them feel like it's their idea, or in fact, let some of their ideas be the thing that you build, right? And all of a sudden, that thing that was going to happen, that's going to take 2 weeks, they can do overnight, right? Because they're so excited to make it happen. And so it's that kind of feeling that you have to tap into, I think.
That's cool. It reminds me of a quote. I think it was something like, "If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go further, go together."
Yeah.
So really getting that cohesively done.
I like that.
Awesome. In your career, you've been a designer and a product manager.
Right.
And what advice do you have for product leaders that want that stronger connection with their design counterparts?
Right. Well, I think about a few things. One is, to appreciate the fact that designers really care about craft, right? And of course, product managers care about craft too, but it just manifests in a very different way. And that pride and craft is something that you have to just have more empathy around, right? Because at the end of the day, it may not be the case that you have a perfect metric that, is able to express the importance of that craft. And yet it's something that's so inherent in designers that they care about because they have take so much pride in their work. Um, so just coming from a place of understanding of that is really important versus challenging that all the time.
Mm.
And then the second thing, I would think about is just kind of like um, creating a setup in which designers are able to really advocate for the user while ignoring some business or technical constraints. Like allow them to, have that space because I think a healthy relationship between a designer, PM, or designer, PM, and engineer is that, you know, designers are exclusively thinking about the end user experience and trying to push the limits based on that. And they're advocates for a customer. And of course, everyone should be. But in a setup where, for example, a designer is really advocating for that, and engineers advocating maybe for, the scalability or the feasibility of something, then that's when you actually can come in as a PM and facilitate that. And if a designer is already kind of feeling like they aren't allowed to do that, then you end up having a kind of like much less interesting discussion. You're not able to push each other and ultimately create the better products. So giving them a space to do that, giving them the space to be imagining bigger ideas, I think is really important.
And also feels like not just shutting them down, giving them that space to be able to do that.
Right, right.
So Config has been fantastic with the number of launches that you've done. I'd love to dig into one of these product launches. Could be any one. That's one of your favorite ones. It's sort of hard to make you pick one,
Right,
but
right.
specifically going to the 0 to 1 process of how did you think about this? How did you validate the customer needs around this? What were some challenges? How did you overcome them?
Yeah. I mean, definitely hard to pick favorites, but if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick Figma slides. And the 0 to 1 of it was really interesting because, frankly, it was one of those things where designers were telling us that they wanted it, and in fact, were showing that through their actions. And it was very much similar to FigJam. FigJam back in 2020, we had the pandemic, and people were using Figma design in really interesting ways. They were hanging out there, doing happy hours there, having meetings there, right? And it was not at all what Figma was intended to be, but it was this fun, immersive place where you could feel each other's presence in a fun way. And, that really inspired us to think about, okay, how can we productize that? And similarly with, Figma slides, the motivation was the fact that people were using Figma to build decks already. And, Dylan shared the stat today where 3.5 million decks were made just in the last year alone on Figma. And in fact, the room, when he asked the question, how many of you have, built decks on Figma, it's almost everyone, right? And so I often think that, when people are hacking your product
Yeah.
in really interesting ways, yeah, those are the indications that there is a huge need, right? They're going out of their way to, fulfill that need, that unmet need. So that was really interesting. And then, it kind of started as a Maker Week project. A Maker Week is Figma's version of a hackathon. And there are a bunch of passionate individuals who decided to, will this into existence, make a case for it, and the rest is history.
I can't wait to dig into Figma slides. I think it's going to be fantastic. Whenever people do make slides in Figma, they're like 10 times better. So can't wait to dig in myself. And, with the increasing competition in the design space,
Yeah.
how is Figma planning to differentiate? And some of this obviously we'll be talking about today, but what are some trends that you're trying to keep ahead of?
Right, right, right. Well, there are many trends, I think, and the first one is we think about where product development is going, and there are a few ways that we think it's going to evolve. The first one is just bringing design and production closer together, right? Traditionally, design and engineering were very siloed disciplines, and you had this big handoff and this big translation process. Yeah, some things get lost in translation as a result. We're trying to solve that problem both through workflow, communication, but also bringing more concepts from code into design so that, the designer and developers are able to speak the same language. And I really do think that's the future because, it shouldn't be the case that, something that you design and something that you build is so disconnected. And so we're trying to bring those worlds closer together. And I think the industry is as well. I think the second one is really around AI, which is the ability for more people to participate deeply, right? Even as a product manager, today maybe you're just leaving some comments of feedback, right, to designers, but maybe you should be able to reach in and make some adjustments, or that comment that you left, maybe that should be the prompt to kind of generate a design and see a visual representation of your feedback, and that makes you give better feedback as a result, right? So those are some of the things I think that are going to change in terms of AI's capacity to bring more people into the process, as well as AI's capacity to, make the process more efficient so that exploration is really easy or much faster so you can explore a bunch of more ideas.
Hmm.
So that's kind of like the trends I would say around product development and software development. Um, I also think that, in terms of differentiation, one of the things we're really trying to do is think about, how do we bring the end-to-end process into one platform? And one of the value propositions of Figma way back when was being a single source of truth, like that kind of promise that if I give you a link to a Figma file, you're seeing the most up-to-date design, right?
Hmm.
You're not digging around for V2, V3, V4 final, right? You know for sure that what you're looking at is the latest design. And how do you actually apply that to all parts of the product development process? And that's why, for example, when we brought in dev mode, which is, our product for developers, it's not that we actually created a net new product for developers. We actually brought developers into Figma, but gave them a view of the world that was tailored to them, but they could be operating on the same artifact that's the source of truth. So designers make an update, developers immediately see that. And similarly with Figma slides, we say, actually, there's this thing called this design mode, this toggle. A designer can go in and toggle on design mode on the slide so they get all their superpowers so they can keep everything up to date without kind of copy pasting a lot of things across a lot of files. So I think the future is one in which you have one artifact, and people are bringing their different tools to fulfill their use cases or skills. And I think that's differentiating if you can have all of that in one platform.
Yeah, so really just bringing together design, production, engineering, everything together and
Yeah.
having that source of truth is super important.
Yeah.
I know you talked about AI, but our audience absolutely loves hearing about it. Would love a little bit more about how you plan to leverage AI at Figma and just
Right.
kind of future visioning.
Right. Well, I mean, internally, we like to talk about the two aspects of AI. It's capacity to lower the floor, meaning bringing more people into the creative process. And then its capacity to raise the ceiling, which is, how do you take expert designers and make them even more effective or allow them to be even more expressive or powerful? And we invest in both because we think both are important. And for example, we recently just showed the prompt to design feature. And that's a feature that will let more people participate, right? Because maybe you're a product manager that just wanted to have expressed their idea for a pitch deck, right? And it can be a good enough design or something that you can iterate off of. And that's going to be really powerful for you to be able to anything you can express in words, you can express in a credible design. But at the same time, we really think that just as important, if not more important, is how do we take all the inefficiencies of design today and allow AI to help with that? So, for example, today there's so much work that goes into making a design look realistic, right? Like a mock-up is called a mock-up because you put all this mock data in, but a lot of time is spent, finding that perfect photo, finding the right information, and designers get lazy, so they'll put lorem ipsum, they'll put some placeholder gray rectangle and call it a day, right? And those are things that aren't necessarily strategic or interesting things, but are really important to make the design feel more convincing or a stress tested design. And so those are the kind of things that AI can do so that the designer can then focus on much more important things like solving the bigger problem or even just exploring a wider array of solutions to arrive at a better solution.
Yeah, it's really cool that you're tackling both new users
Yeah,
and their ability to get into Figma more and also the pros. And I just
right.
can't even imagine what this is going to look like in a year or two from now.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
That's awesome. Now moving into probably something that's like very front in mind for our audience. We're on culture, team, and innovation.
Right.
Creating a cohesive, a high performing product team requires you to have a strong culture. Could you talk about specific cultural values or principles that you use at Figma and how you instill those in your product teams? And also, how do you ensure that they're upheld as you scale?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about two company values that we have that I think our product team embraces really deeply. The first one is we call building community. And it's like this idea that both in the internal, external sense, the importance of actually building the community, making people feel welcomed and interacting with the community. And, you'll see that here at Config too, where a lot of where we draw energy is speaking to our customers and hearing what they have to say, taking their input and I encourage a lot of the product team to just keep a really strong pulse on users. A lot of us can text some of our biggest customers and ask, "Hey, what do you think?" And they'll give a brutally honest review on something, and that's so valuable to have, right? And that's the kind of relationship that I want all my product managers to have with customers.
Awesome.
I think the other company value is love your craft, and this idea that craft is this really interesting thing where, it can mean a lot of things, but, when you think about kind of a high quality experience, it's one of those things where, again, like a goal could try to capture that, but doesn't always quite, right? And it doesn't quite capture that. And, you know, it, I describe it often as, when you enter a house and it's completely orderly and beautiful, then you feel like you want to continue to keep it beautiful, right? But as
That's
soon
awesome.
as, people start to kind of make it messy or things, aren't taken care of, then it feels like you have the license to also do the same. And so I think that's why it's really important to kind of have that sense of craft and feel like, okay, proud about our product, proud to and set the example for others. And that way it's actually easier to keep that. So that's something I encourage both on the product and design teams.
That's awesome. And by the way, that shows even being here at Config, the details of the conference and how well it's run. It's a company value that it shows here in the conference and also the product. Appreciate that. Yeah. In your experience, what are some common pitfalls in scaling a product team, and how have you successfully navigated these challenges at Figma and make sure that you have high team performance and morale?
Yeah. I mean, I often fall victim to the very same, challenges. We've grown so quickly, so it's not to say that we have everything perfect, but one of the things that I see when, teams scale is that you start to ship your org chart, right? And people talk a lot about it, which is, it's common advice to say, "Hey, make sure your product doesn't reflect your org chart." But you have to think about why it always ends up happening. And the reason it ends up happening is because that's one of the easiest ways to scale, right? When you have 20 different teams, it's so much easier to assign them clear goals. Yeah, and that's kind of your interface. Like, I as a leader might not be able to know exactly what each of those teams is doing. But if we agree on a contract that says, "Hey, you're going for this goal, so do whatever it takes to achieve that goal and we're good," right? That's like a way to scale leadership, right? Otherwise, you're having to be in everyone's business all the time. But the problem with that is, you actually end up creating this structure where everything is siloed, right? We're not thinking beyond the team goals. And all of a sudden, you create a product that reflects that very organizational principle.
Mm,
And so, that's why a lot of companies end up shipping their org chart because it's kind of the natural way of scaling in a way.
yeah.
And so, I actually think that, design teams in particular have the capacity to break through that, to really put the user in the center and think horizontally. And so we even have a small group of designers who are thinking about the experience horizontally and trying to push on things, right? Like, okay, why are these patterns inconsistent? Or think about the person jumping from A to B, like, make it make sense for them. And, you have to kind of equip them with the ability to do that. And sometimes, that means that some team goals are not advanced as far as we like, but, you really need to give them the space to explore something like that. And, the redesign of the Figma interface is a good example of that that we just launched where, a small group of designers really figured out, how to optimize across all these different teams, but not make it so obvious where the team boundaries are. And so, yeah, I think it's important to create a structure in which, you have someone who's divorced from the individual teams to try to take on that kind of higher level view.
That's a really, really cool tactical tip. So thanks for sharing that. I think like when you're shipping the org chart, if you get to that stage, having a team that's small and independent that can look beyond all the teams is really important.
Yeah.
So, Marty Kagan has this line that if you want something like, fast speed, you have zero innovation. So, there's always this trade off between innovation, creativity, and structure, right? Too much structure means you move fast, but there's no innovation. So, how does Figma balance creativity and innovation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that's really wonderful about Figma that I noticed immediately when I came here was the bottoms up energy, right? Like an engineer noticing something is wrong and just shipping a change to fix it, right? Or seeing a feature request and just implementing it because deep down inside they really believed in it. And I think, it kind of goes back to this idea of like people pushing for their own ideas are really deeply motivated. Like, I think cultivating that is important. It's important for innovation. And sometimes we get it wrong, but like, it's a really important muscle, I think, for a company to have.
Hmm.
That being said, they can feel unstructured, right?
Yeah.
And everyone doing that can feel it can feel chaotic at times.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's a little bit like, how can you actually figure out some lightweight rails or structure? So, for example, like, you know, that same horizontal team that we talked about, they might define the information architecture for the product. And if they define it in a way that, gives enough people enough room to be creative, right? That's really great, but it still ensures that, there's one mental model for the user. And so you kind of have to find these balances, I think, of, making sure that there's a little bit of the chaotic bottoms of energy because that's where, these gems are found, right? But at the same time, like having enough structure so that it's not like nonsensical to the user.
Yeah. Interesting. Very
Mhm.
cool. Getting to our last set of questions.
Yeah.
How do you stay informed and inspired in your role as a product leader? What are some, books or podcasts or resources or activities that you do to
Yeah.
keep top of
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
craft?
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing about any product manager is to remain curious, right? And try new things. And you have to remember that, you yourself are a user of a bunch of different products. And try to, challenge the way you work, right? So for example, even as a product manager, and I've been doing product management, so to speak, for, over a decade at this point, it's really easy to kind of slip into old habits of working.
Yeah.
This is how a product review should be, or this is how planning should be. When in reality, there's so much happening, people trying new things, new tools emerging. And I think, this ability to kind of like defamiliarize yourself, with what you're doing or kind of bring in these new perspectives is really important. So, and you start to notice these details like, oh, that was really intuitive. I didn't even have to think about it, or that was really hard. So I think for me, it's like playing with new tools.
Yeah.
And my team is constantly annoyed that I try to like innovate on planning process too much or bring in new tools. And, we have our own problems that maybe we have too many of these. But I think the exposure to, different mental models, for example, right? Like, is really important because then you start to see that, like, oh, some of the things that I thought were definitively like the way things should work were just assumptions that I had in my head. So that curiosity and playing,
This
set
is
the
important.
play, yeah,
It's important.
yeah,
I absolutely love the pieces that on how Figma builds product that are published. absolutely great to kind of read those. So some cool things that you guys are trying. Thank you. And the last question, reflecting on your career, what's one or two things that you wish you knew earlier that would be really helpful for you?
Yeah. Um, a few things. One is, especially as an early career PM, I kind of always assumed that all the leaders knew what they were doing. And,
Oh, that's not the case.
yeah. And I think it was really important for me, now as a leader to see that actually a lot of us are still trying to figure it out ourselves, right? And because of that, even though we can sound assertive or our position gives us the authority or, more gravity to, the things we say, it's so important for us to be challenged by people. And we're always inspired by people who speak up and say, actually, like, I don't agree, like, this is with this fundamental assumption. And, I kind of wish I knew that earlier because I now do that in my own role of like, wait, the way we do planning or the way we do performance review, like these things should, be completely reinvented. And like, in my role, it's easier to say that, right? But I think, like you don't realize that, when you're in earlier in your career, I would say. Um, and then I think that the second thing is just like, it's really about finding the people who will take big bets on you. And, a lot of my career moves were moves to jobs where I thought would be a little bit ridiculous on paper for me to have or to be qualified for. Like, when I first went to YouTube, I was before YouTube, I was the, product manager for the left-hand navigation pane of the Windows Mail app on Windows 8, right? And, to go from there to be the product manager of the YouTube app on iOS, which is at the time the biggest app in the world, it just felt like ridiculous. Like, and in fact, like I had never even owned an iPhone and I was going to be the iOS PM. And so that was clearly a case of someone taking a really big bet on me. And, every step along the way, even, Dylan hiring me as an exec, even though I didn't have that kind of experience, those are the things that are going to really help you grow. And of course, they're challenging, right? But, I think that's something that I didn't really think about until I reflected back on how lucky I was to, have met these people. But really, like, the importance of surrounding yourself with people who do believe in you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the
Yeah.
humility in your answer and about, hey, all leaders don't may not know what they're talking about. Yeah, it's important to kind of know that. Yuki, thank you very much for sharing your insights and experience with us. This has been a fantastic podcast. It's been a pleasure having you on the CPO Mastery podcast.
Thank you so much, Mel, and thank you for coming to Config.
Of course. Thanks so much.
Thank you.